Hello, beautiful people. My name is Lisa Yaboa, and welcome to this series, Now and Next, How the Church is Changing for Good. I'll be your host for today, and we're so grateful that you have joined us for this particular episode. We want to remind you, as with all the other episodes, that you don't have to worry about scribbling down all the notes because the notes from our conversation today can be found at amplifymedia.com/now-and-next. Along with, if you want to view any of the previous episodes that we have aired, you can do so there at that website. Over the past 2 months, we have had conversations about what it looks like for us to have to connect and worship using digital platforms. What does it look like to create community online? And what, as we are kind of re-entering life out of shelter in place, might it look like for us to hold on to some of these digital practices as we look to God's preferred future for us? And today, I'm so grateful to have three beautiful conversation partners who are going to help us imagine what it looks like for us to kind of live in that both and of both curating in-person worship, but also to holding on to some of the best digital practices that we can curate in the church. And so let me introduce who we have with us today. I'm so grateful to have with us Zach Bechtold.
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Zach Bechtold. I live in north central Montana in a town called Choteau. I have the opportunity to pastor three churches out here, and I have a beautiful family. I've been hosting a podcast called Bearded Theologians for the last 4 years or so, and I simply just love this idea of how we merge in-person church and digital church and community. So thank you for having me.
Yeah. We also have with us today Stephen Brewster.
Hi, I'm Stephen, and I get to help churches all over the country navigate the season of life that they're in. We talk about it in the essence of we try to help people overcome being overwhelmed. And there's been a lot of overwhelming things that have happened in the last 3 months. And so we've been pretty busy, but we're excited to get to be part of today's conversation.
That's me, overwhelmed. My middle name is Overwhelmed.
Most of us it is.
And also with us today is Jasmine Taylor.
Hello, Jasmine Taylor again, Reverend Jasmine Taylor. I'm from Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago. I've been serving there as their DigiPastor, so most people know me as DigiPastor for the past 8 years. And I've been working to connect people who haven't physically been in the building to us virtually for the past 8 years. And we've done it a little bit before that. So we've been, I feel like we've been ahead of the game when it comes to making sure that we are connecting with people outside of the church walls.
Mm-hmm. For those of you who are watching, you may remember that in one of our earlier episodes, we shared with you out of our survey that 90% of church leaders were having to move to doing worship virtually, but 65% of them had not had virtual forms of worship before we kind of were thrust into this new reality of COVID-19. For our panelists, what, in your experience and from stories that you've heard from other churches, has changed in our virtual worship during this time?
I think, of course, the biggest change, which is very obvious, is that we don't get a chance to see all of those faces and those smiles. So the importance of trying to connect with people and like making sure that when they're watching online, you're making sure that they know you're watching, saying hello, and just, I think that the connection and the physical presence, of course, is the biggest thing. People want to be together personally.
What I've seen in my community is the way that church has changed in the last few weeks or a couple months is how people are gathering and when they're gathering. Forever, it seems my churches have met at 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and I can't tell you how many excited texts and conversations that I've had just bumping into people of, hey, I watched church on Wednesday this week in my sweats with my cup of coffee, and that's what I needed, and it's been this big shift of, oh, this is how we do this now. And it's how we were kind of doing it before, but now it's accessible. And people are finding ways to engage in worship outside of Sunday morning, what we've been trying to do forever, right?
Yeah, I think to piggyback on what Zach said, we've done church the same way for the last like 50 years, right? And a lot of churches did start a digital alternative, but it was still the digital alternative in the same method as the physical alternative, right? And you program your entire life. Like, you program everything about your life. We are no longer in a society that has to wait for someone else's programming to interact. And church learned very quickly, like over a week's time, the necessity and the power of digital and how people are going to program their own life. So you have to start providing that alternative. Beyond that, it's scalability. And so we now are in an environment where it doesn't matter how many parking spots you have, how many volunteers you have, how many goldfish or diapers you have for the kids ministry. You can scale at mass if you know what your mission and calling is, and you're able to articulate that really, really well.
Stephen, you said something that kind of piggybacks on this next question, and that is, when even for churches that had to move to kind of a digital platform, we weren't trying to just recreate what we were doing before. So it's not like, oh, how can I make worship look exactly like we were doing it on March 1st? Because we're also creating worship for people who are taking shelter in place, many of them for the very first time in their lives living through a global pandemic. What are some particular ways that you've seen some authentic points of connecting with people digitally that might look different than when churches who've always known what it's like to live stream, how they've also had to shift to contextualize to this moment? Totally.
Well, even most churches that were streaming anyway, were just streaming the alternative that they had for a room full of people, right? And we weren't thinking about a lens of someone sitting on a couch, right? And so, when you lead worship from a stage with a band and you have, whatever add-ons that you add to that, whether it's screens or lights or fog or whatever it is, you add these things, and none of that translates when I'm sitting on my couch and my toddler's running around, right? So we moved from being like performance worship to fireside chat worship. And I think it's required worship leaders to really engage a different gear in leading. As a worship leader today, you have to be able to go someplace authentically on your own, and then allow that presence to impact people when they're sitting on their couch, because they're not going to stand up with you. They're not going, all of the tricks that we would use to motivate a room or engage a room no longer work, And so I think that there's something beautiful in that, though. There's some authenticity in that. There's a new depth of worship and a new skill for worship leaders to learn and develop in that season. And I think the same thing is true with a communicator. Like, you can see communicators who have leaned into this moment, they're using the chat. They're using the camera and the screen in a different way than they did when there was a room full of people that they were feeling energy off of.
Zach or Jasmine?
So I think some of the ways that we try to, again, make it personal is that there are certain people that we know are watching. Even during a service, we'll call out their names to make sure that they know we're watching. We'll call out different cities, states, people from other countries, whoever's watching. We always try to make sure that we're connecting with them. And like you said, I don't do the actual Sunday service preaching right now. Pastor Moss is doing it all, but his interest or his change was the idea of preaching to the empty room and not getting that energy back from the congregation. So those are some different things that we've worked on doing. One of the other things is, again, camera shots change. In the beginning, we started with kind of so you could see that the church was empty. And then now we have moved the camera shot closer in now because everybody knows it's empty. In the beginning, we were curating services. And so we had songs and music. We had things that were pre-recorded that we curated into worship. But I found myself in digital fights with people to explain, Lord, this is not really happening. It's not really happening. This is pre-recorded. some of the other things that we've done is we don't have our children's church anymore because, that happened in person with the children. So one of our pastors, Reverend Calvin Jones, actually does a children's worship service now in between services. And he does cartoon, rap, puppets. He does a whole bunch of interactive stuff with the little ones. So he does one for tots, and then he does one for teens. And it is based on the bigger message that Pastor Moss will preach on a Sunday. So trying to make sure we engage the little ones as well as the younger ones as well as some of the stuff that we've done as well as for change.
Mm-hmm.
I love both of that. What Jasmine and Stephen said of we've had to become flexible, and what we've done forever on a Sunday morning doesn't translate on a screen. The other screens, the smoke, the children's time, that doesn't translate when we come together in this digital way. So being flexible in that has been so vital to how we do worship now. And one of the things I keep telling my colleagues and folks in my area is, hey, at best, a sitcom on TV is 22 minutes with commercials, and a drama is 44, 45 with commercials. We're often not that engaging. We're not that entertaining. And so how do we take worship, make it zoom in, make it intimate, and make it meaningful for our people, and finding this flexibility in these ways to say, hey, children's sermon isn't working now. How do we do that differently and still bring our kids in and still bring our folks in a very intimate way. And so I love y'all's flexibility in that and creativity to go, hey, this is how we do it now.
Mm-hmm.
One of the beautiful things in scripture, it talks about, how will they hear unless someone is sent. And I think, our flexibility is really kind of an act of hospitality, of recognizing we really need to meet people where they are, not just based off of our capacity or competency. It's like, no, we really want to love people well. So maybe on the opposite end, what would you say might not be worth pastors or church leaders' time as we think about our future with kind of digital worship? What may we need to also kind of let go of that may not necessarily serve us?
I'll start just by saying that I think that maybe not feeling like you need to be in all places at all times. So maybe finding one place, one platform, and doing that platform well, and not spreading yourself so thin. Because you see that another church has YouTube or Instagram or all of those. You don't work with what you can and be good at what you got.
Mm-hmm. We like to call that the ministry of staying in your lane, and it's okay. God gives us a lane, and we can swerve in it.
Yeah.
My hope is that we don't just automatically go back to the way it was, zoom back out and do digital worship like we did 3 months ago. That we find our lane, we stay in it, swerve around a little bit, figure it out, but that we don't just automatically regress and go back to the things that we were doing and that weren't working. We found a way that this works. Let's keep moving in that direction.
Yeah, and I would say avoid normal. Like we hear about normal all the time. I'm actually nauseated by the word normal. We were never called to be normal in the first place. Normal is boring and average and can blend with everything else. So I would say, where have you seen growth and opportunity in this season, and then maximize that? And I suspect in most of the churches that I've been talking to, there's something that you were doing for the last year up until May that you thought was very productive, and you've realized in this shelter at home season that no one misses it. So take all the energy, resource, time, effort that you put into that and shift it to this now, and learn how to maximize this season so that because when we first go back to church, everyone's going to come running back eventually, and we're going to by the fall sometime we'll probably have really, really big in-service numbers, and then people are going to fall back into their rhythm. And what we've taught them is that this allows us to not be forced to be in service to have service. Mm-hmm. And so we've told people, this is awesome, this is great, this is how you're supposed to tune in. And now if we take that away from them, that's probably not our best customer service method.
I like what you said about maximizing the moment. I mean, I feel like this is such a place for us to, for lack of a better word, reset.
Mhm.
And really try to figure out what matters most in the church life, what matters most to the people in the congregation. Because some stuff we do may not necessarily be, like you said, important. I will add to the other question about one of the things that we've had to do is we didn't do this, and I'm not sure whether you all have done this, but we had to add a dial-in for church service because there's a lot of people who don't necessarily have access to the internet or ability to get on the internet. And so while we're teaching people, we also had to find ways to get them involved quickly rather than further along the way.
Just one more question before we take a time for a break. And Reverend Taylor, you might be able to help us to imagine this, but you know, there is that idea that in the midst of worship, we're doing something with people, not something to people. And I do think that when you're watching a screen, people can sometimes take on a more passive posture. What are some ways that you are finding in this season, and also as we look to the future, to kind of engage people in the midst of digital worship that feels like it's a with moment and not a to moment? I know that's huge in my community because we're very much a call and response type of church. So I would love to just hear what are some ways that you are helping this to be a with in digital worship.
Absolutely. So one is I try to speak to people when they join. I welcome them to service. I will conversate with them. Hey, I haven't seen you. How you been? So in the chat, we're talking back and forth. I'm putting sermon notes up. I'm asking other people to share sermon notes. Just really trying to make sure to connect with them and whatever resource they might need while service is going on. Like I said, the bulletin or how to give or whatever. I'm always constantly there, and they know, they speak back. So we have Sunday morning, how you doing? Welcome to service kind of moments. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing that we do. And again, trying to call people by name. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of people. So on Facebook, it's more difficult to call them by name, but we're on other platforms. So on Facebook, I do as much as I can. And then I'm on our live stream platform. And then we got YouTube. So trying to make sure to just be personal and let them know you're watching. Mm-hmm.
And those are all phenomenal ways. Mm-hmm. About 50% of people who are watching on a mobile device or on a television. And so if you've turned your mobile device, you've lost the chat most of the time. So engaging the little banner that can run across the bottom, as if you were CNN or MSNBC or Fox News or whatever, like, you know, they barrage you with information. There's a chart over here and a thing going across the bottom and things flying around. I mean, it almost is too much for somebody with ADD like me, but there's a tasteful way to use it. And so being inquisitive around how people are going to engage your content, right? Thinking about call to actions across that bar, making sure that you're giving options for people to text in, making sure that you're giving them options to follow up after the service, making sure that you're resetting the conversation every 5 to 7 minutes in the chat room or chat environment, because people are coming in and going out. And so, you know, like Zach said, no one's hanging out for 75 minutes. And so making sure that you're resetting that room every 5 to 7 minutes so that you're getting the best action from people. And then following up with every person who's engaged. Like, we love our viewership number, right? Because our viewership numbers right now, like a church of 70 people is now 10,000 people on a weekend. And that while that may be, and there's probably a revival taking place, what we do know for sure is every comment, every like, every share, every post, those are actual real people on the other side of that IP. And so going offensively and chasing them and grabbing their screen name or their email address and engaging in a conversation throughout the week helps really move that needle.
Zach, anything you would like to add?
No, so we do a pre-recorded service. And so we don't have that real-time feedback. And what I found fascinating is I know when people watch my service, for the most part, because I'll get a text message. I got one yesterday, in fact, that said, hey, I recorded my sermon up in the mountains. And it started with, hey, Pastor, loved that you were out in the mountains, loved the background, loved the sermon. I had one thing I disagreed on. Great, let's talk about that. And that, just that willingness and that vulnerability for them to say, hey, there was something in your message today that just, it didn't mesh with me. And so can we have a conversation about that? That openness and that willingness for them to even bring that, I think, I don't think they would have done it 6 months ago. They would have just shook my hand at the receiving line and gone on. And so this has allowed us to have engage in those conversations more, however we're doing it, whether it's live or after the fact. And there's something very beautiful in that engagement of how we're able to do this right now.
Well, we're going to take a quick break and hear from our sponsors, Amplify Media, and then get to come back and hear from these wonderful panelists that we have with us today. We'll see you in just a bit.
Amplify is a space in which Christians can explore their faith more deeply in relationship with one another and be equipped to impact even more people for the gospel. You can even stream your church's services, bringing your congregation together even when they aren't in the same building. Engage your ministry and expand your mission by following these simple steps. Get started with Amplify today.
Friends, welcome back. We're grateful that you have joined us for the second half of our conversation. To launch into our conversation, I want to ask this question. COVID-19 and us going into shelter in place coincided with some of the high and holy seasons of our liturgical calendar. We were coming into the beginning of Lent, went through now the 50 days of Easter. We'll be celebrating Pentecost very soon. Tell me some of the ways in which you were able to curate worship experiences digitally during those high and holy seasons that might help us to imagine if we ever had to do this again, how we might be able to do this digitally if something ever happened.
One of the things that we did at our church, which we were trying to figure out, oh my gosh, it's Communion Sunday, it's Easter Sunday. How do we get through this Sunday and make sure that people still feel involved? So we sent out notifications to all of our members to say we're going to have a set your holy sacred space kind of space for your communion. So we had people, we said, grab your wine and crackers or your water and bread or whatever elements that you have, and we'll bless them through the internet. And so we were able to have communion through the internet. And we had people to send in photos, and we created a photo album on our Facebook page of all of the different families and their communion tables. So it was kind of amazing to go through Holy Week. We even had coloring sheets. So we did a coloring contest online. So you could color your palms for Palm Sunday. And, just getting people involved. And everybody, we had, who wins the coloring contest, and just not a real super competitive thing, but just for fun to keep them engaged. We had a good time.
I think for me, it was the hardest service to plan was Good Friday. The weight of that service, and how do you create the darkness and that feel of people being in the room as you put out candles and read the liturgy and the scripture, and just finding ways to do that and make it meaningful and not just staring at a screen, and like we said earlier, you got toddlers running around, people going on, life is still happening while we're doing digital worship services. And so how do we find these ways to bring the reality, the weight of a Good Friday and Easter, Pentecost, any Sunday? How do we find the ways that that's engaging and connects with folks? And that's been really fun, but really challenging as well.
Yeah, I think you have to be very innovative while being extremely authentic, right? And so you have to know what it is that you do well, and what would that look like in a physical environment, because that's what we've been trained in. Now, what is the digital alternative to that? Not the replacement, but the alternative, because we are going to go back to a season where we're allowed to meet in churches again. It's going to be awesome. But it should always be yes and, not either or. So just figuring out how you take what you do authentically, innovate around it to bring it to a digital platform, and probably not put the pressure of one service on that moment. Like, use your digital media to set up that day, that moment, that service, and make sure that people are engaging throughout the day, not just around that 60-minute block or 45-minute block or whatever it is. Using all of the resources to really enhance the experience, get somebody thinking about Pentecost Sunday 2 days, 3 days before, so that when they actually get there, their heart's in a place that they're ready to actually receive in that moment, as opposed to just, we're going to try to figure this out inside of this 35 minutes.
Mm-hmm. And can I add, because you mentioned Good Friday, one of the things that we did was with 7 cries from Chicago. And we got 7 pastors from 7 different denominations, and they all recorded at different times. And we had one service put together, but it was like this ecumenical moment for everybody to just come together. And again, that thing of, we're all in this together, right? Mm-hmm. 7 cries from Chicago. It's an amazing service.
I love that. The way that it's allowed us to come together ecumenically within the connection, however, and say, oh, hey, we are in this together, and it's not, let's do this together. That's been really, really fun. Across our area, we've got our conferences 4 states, and pastors are reaching out and saying, hey, let's share the pulpit. Let's give our folks different voices in different places and just different experiences that otherwise we wouldn't have the opportunity, because you'd have to travel 10 hours to get here, and the logistics are a nightmare, and this allows us to do really creative things like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, what are some other creative, like, online experiences that you've seen or also been able to create during this time? And the reason why I ask this question is that though we might be transitioning out of shelter in place, there's this sense that probably large gatherings will still be discouraged for a while. But most of our high and holy moments, most of our greatest times of celebration, you're supposed to bring lots of people together. And so we're going to need to figure out how to sometimes create both an online experience when we cannot have an in-person gathering. So are there other online experiences that you've been able to create that are celebratory, or maybe even those when we need to mourn?
Well, one of our small groups or services that we do here in our community is Bar Plus Church. And it's exactly what it is. It's going to a bar and having whatever drink, from water to an adult beverage, and talking about life and God and where we're seeing love and grace and where we're struggling. And that was one of the griefs that our community experienced, of we missed that. And so we took our Bar Plus Church and brought it into the digital world, and have been meeting. We were meeting once a month in person, and we've been meeting once a week throughout the COVID crisis or pandemic. And being able to gather with our community that was here locally through Zoom, but also bringing in people from across the country who saw our post and said, hey, I want to be a part of that. And being able to continue on with those, with our small group or just alternative Bar Plus Church ministries in a very fruitful and valuable way for people just to come and be just as they were in person, but now digitally.
Mm-hmm. So a couple of things that we've been doing that I think are really, really adding to our congregation, so to speak, is we have mental health awareness Zoom sessions. So anybody can join in. We have some mental health professionals on, and we just kind of sit and have conversations. Right now, a lot of people are feeling isolated and lonely, cabin fever. So we get people who are calling who just want somebody to talk to. So we do the Zoom like that. One of the other things that I do with our media ministries right now is do game night. So we were going from once a month, and now we have game night once a week almost. Some of the other stuff that we do is online Bible study, but we make sure that we do packets each week. We do attendance each week. So people want to make sure they sign the attendance link. And so they're sending me emails if they couldn't sign in. So just making people feel like they're really a part of it. We did a virtual memorial service for all of those that we've lost since the beginning since we could not have our funeral services anymore. And we got their pictures and their names, and we scrolled the pictures across there. We did an online guest book so that anybody watching could sign the guest book for the families. We've done We've been working a lot. We've got a whole bunch of different things trying to cater to. We got young adult Bible study versus adult Bible study. So just different stuff.
Mm-hmm. Reverend Taylor, you were talking about some things you've been doing with TikTok and like prom, and I just love to hear more about that.
So we had virtual prom this past Friday night. We invited all of our juniors and seniors, not just from our church, but from churches throughout the community who missed their opportunity to go on senior prom or junior prom. And so me and another one of our pastors, we in order to promote it, did TikToks. Mm-hmm. And in our TikToks, for example, mine had, my hair was in this big afro, mm-hmm. and I had on a face mask, and I had on sweatpants and a t-shirt, and the song was going, and I danced, and then I jumped. And after I jumped, I had on a beautiful prom dress, and my hair was made. And so we did a TikTok prom challenge. And then the other pastor did a video as well. So we did those videos trying to get people to just join and be interested in TikTok prom. We're going to be doing, as well, we did the Zoom with the DJ and all of that. Our married couples also did a party with Zoom and DJ. They did Facebook for theirs, the married couples. But we're also going to be doing a graduation and celebration of all of our graduates from high school, college, higher level degrees. So we'll be doing an online graduation celebration for them as well.
I love good parties, by the way.
Mm-hmm. It was a good party. We pretended like we were in person. I was like, y'all, I got to sit down. My heels, my feet hurt. I mean, I went to the snack bar during prom. We had prom dates. Everybody brought their teddy bears for prom dates. Like we had a good time.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Steve, I don't know if you have anything that you would want to add to just some creative online experiences that you've been.
I mean, I think what's been fun is watching churches figure out how to engage the other 6 days of the week. Right? And then really our faith engages every moment of our life. And so there's no reason why we shouldn't be more expressive that way. So I love seeing, like if you think about midweek service, right? Midweek service, except for maybe students, has struggled to maintain momentum in our generation. And so, but right now, a digital alternative of that is definitely attracting people. And so I think it's really, really important to identify what are ways that we can take the ministry that we're already doing and just provide that digital alternative that allows a group of 20 to become a group of 70, just because we opened up a computer or turned on a camera. And I think that also thinking that we don't have to fit necessarily into someone's 1 hour block, we can create this content and allow them to engage at their flexibility, but still do ministry around that. And so I think those are some of the exciting things that I see coming out of this season.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, Stephen, you're like the great transitioner. This season of COVID-19 and having to move things to a digital platform also gives us the opportunity to be more expansive in who we reach. How have you seen kind of these online experiences being welcoming and also inclusive? Yeah. And also maybe where could we improve with with being inclusive and welcoming? Yeah,
that's a great question. So I give me a little grace as I answer that. I think there's 3 circles that we have as targets or audience targets in this season. The smallest circle and the most important one is the people that call our church home. And in this season, our responsibility is to make sure we keep them connected. We make sure that we keep them fed, we keep them growing and moving through their faith journey. That's the most important part, right? Because in this season, we have to steward the people that God has brought to our community. The second circle is all of the people that are tuning in, because what we know is that during seasons of trauma and pandemics and whenever something bad happens, humans typically run to one of 3 things. They run to faith, they run to knowledge, or they run to creativity, innovation. Well, all of these people are running to faith right now. And when they would typically run to our church, they're now running to our web address. And so we have a disproportionate number of people tuning in during this season. And while we love the people that are tuning in from the Netherlands, that's probably 1 or 2 people. The reality is about 85% of the people who are tuning in from driving distance to your location. And so our goal with that group is to give them handles and start pulling them towards that smaller group, so that we have the ability that when the doors open, if they choose to, they can come and be part of our community. If they choose not to, they can still be part of our community and never enter one of our buildings. And I really believe that we're going to see, it's going to be a shift in ministry, but we're going to see that people call our church home who never enter our church. They give, they serve, they attend frequently. They go through all of our courses and join a Zoom small group, but they never come into our building. And so I think that group is important, that we're giving them hooks to pull them towards that smaller community. Then the third community is just the world in general. And as a church, you know what God's called your church to do, what is core and authentic to your ministry, and giving them Jesus and giving them a next step. Those are the important things for that group.
Mm-hmm.
That's my fear, as we kind of get back to, we've used the word normal a little bit this morning, but getting back into being able to be in in-person gatherings and finding that these our digital small groups, our digital worship, man, they were working. Well, how do we bring that to the in-person? I think that's the wrong question. Those are working. Let's keep doing those things. And Stephen, like you say, it's those circles, right? And so we keep doing the digital ministry. We keep doing the things that are working in those ways, not with the expectation that people will walk through our doors and sit in our pews, but they will engage from wherever they are. And that is a life-giving and beautiful way for people to connect with God and with community. And why give that up? Why expect anything but, hey, keep doing what you're doing because you like it and it works. And that's just going to be one of our circles of how we connect with people. And that's kind of my fear and my what I hear when people, well, when we return back to normal, we'll have all of these people that have been engaging. No, probably not, because they're engaging in this way. And so let's find ways to keep that going and keep that momentum while we figure out what it looks like to come back in person.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it's going to be, we have a really large church, so I feel like it's going to be a long time before we are really able to get back together. But I'll say that during this time, again, it's taught us a lot. We still open the doors of the church during the end of service, and we have a virtual invitation. And we still have people that virtually walk the aisle every Sunday. So it's amazing that people, they still work to connect. We have virtual membership class. We used to have where you had to be outside of a 2-hour radius in order to be a virtual member. And now it's still the same, but now a lot of people from Chicago are having to walk the aisle virtually to become members of the church. So the church is still growing. God is still working through the midst, and in the midst of all of it, we are still working.
I think this whole time helps us really understand the world is our parish, and begin to understand what that means and what that looks like in this world of digital ministry, where people can find their church, they can find their communities digitally. And I've been able to for a long time, but now it's pointing towards the church and spirituality. And how do we embrace that?
I know this is going to sound so practical, but I think one of the ways that I've been imagining being more inclusive, welcoming, and invitational is actually adding captions to like my welcomes and my reflection, because it forces me when I'm reading the captions to ask myself, am I using insider language, or am I using language that might be accessible to a wide range of people? Not to say that we can meet the needs of everyone, but just that I, as a practitioner, am thinking about, okay, how would that sound to someone who doesn't know my community intimately, and also to think about those who may not be able to keep up with the speed of my speaking, that I can be more hospitable in those ways. I think what's important is that we definitely all seem to have a heart for making sure that what we're doing digitally will actually connect. It's not just simply in and of itself creating something, but because we want people to feel connected to what we're doing. You've all mentioned this, even as we transition into in-person gatherings, and it may not be Sunday morning worship, but our church people getting to come back together. What digital practices are imperative for us to continue?
I say FaceTime. personal FaceTime, like Zoom calls or house party or those kinds of things where you're not just throwing it out, but that you're having a two-way conversation. I think that is one of the most important things that we need to make sure to continue.
Mm-hmm.
I think in this season that there's two things that are really important. Number one, every person that leads a ministry has to think about their ministry like as if there's a digital alternative and a physical alternative. Now, nobody really wants the digital alternative to the church picnic. That's going to be very boring to watch. But most other things we can do in a digital environment as well as a physical environment. I think that is really, really important that we pay attention to that. And then the other thing is to reinvent what your next season looks like. This is an opportunity to reset your meeting structure, your service times, how you do ministry, the practices and the disciplines that happen in your ministries and in your teams. And this is the moment to reset. And I believe the churches that maximize what we've just walked through and what we're walking through currently, and then how they prepare themselves for the next, are the ones that are going to be the tip of the spear of what God's about to do through our churches.
Yeah, yes to all of that. We're not going back. Digital worship, digital community has been here, and it's going to be here to stay. And in letting that go, I think it will be the downfall of churches. Like you said, the tip of the spear is going to be those who continue moving forward and figure out how to mesh these things together. And that's my hope. Let us let go of the things that weren't working. Let us let go of just constantly having to meet, and let's move forward into the fruitful nature of what we've learned through this season of, that thing really wasn't important, so let's move on, and resist that temptation to go back. To go back to what was comfortable, that maybe it was comfortable, but clearly it wasn't working. And so what are the things that are working, and let's keep moving forward.
This is my last question. Obviously we know that as we look to the future, there's going to have to be some type of hybrid of both thinking about in-person kind of incarnational ways of being together, and also to these digital platforms. And yet the reality is that there are going to still be people in our community who may not have the same digital access. And so this means that as we make this transition, we're going to have to communicate and manage people's expectations as to what our future is going to be in regard to this hybrid. What are some ways that you might prepare your community for this new way, for this new future that we're going to have to live into?
I think a lot of our communities are being taught right now how to navigate what's next, right? I don't think education is going to be our number one concern. I think intersection is going to be our number one concern. We have to be very intentional that we are intersecting people in the way that they start to do life coming out of this season. And, if you think about Jesus and his ministry, he intersected people when they were doing the things that they already did. And so we have a responsibility to make sure that we are doing ministry in the spaces and places that people already do life. And if we do that, and we know who we are, we follow our values, we do them well, we're going to see the curve of growth hit our ministries, because we're able to engage people where they're already at.
I agree with the engaging people where they are, but I think that maybe in the future, well, we've been doing it in the past, but I think that in the future it'll be more, we do like social media 101 classes, and just kind of doing classes with people digitally so they know how to, because teaching them how to use Facebook and do a selfie because they want to be involved, but some people just don't know how. Just kind of bringing bringing those who want to come up to speed on how to use digital media and be more interactive with it.
That's so good.
I think my takeaway from all of this is finding your lane, right? We as pastors and churches and people in ministry, I've seen so many we just right out of the gate, we got to do all the things. We got to do this, this, and this, and this. And the burnout of that is so real, especially once we transition from the digital back into the in-person. And my goodness, how do we keep all of that up and not burn out, not kill ourselves, not just crumble away with everything? And so I just keep going back to that. Find your lane, swerve around in it a little bit, do the thing you do well, and keep going. But it's a marathon. We're going to be in this a while, so it will do our hearts, our souls, and our ministries well just to find that thing and keep going and moving forward, and not trying to be everything to everyone in all the places.
I want to thank our panelists again for just the wisdom. Early on, we would say that this webinar series is not just about information, but it's married to the grace of God, which turns into transformation. And for the ways in which you've offered up information that will turn to transformation in our ministries, I'm so grateful to you three. We do hope that you will join us again for our last actual webinar tomorrow, which will be about what it looks like when we are in those in-person gatherings, our homecomings, in our various church contexts. We're going to have some guests who you've seen over the last couple of episodes who are going to join us for that conversation. We again want to remind you that you can find all of the notes from this discussion at amplifymedia.com/now and next. You can also watch all of the previous episodes, but we do hope that you will register to be a part of tomorrow's webinar as we have that last and final time with one another. Thank you again to all of our panelists. Thank you to all of you who have watched, and we are grateful. And again, want to say thank you to Amplify Media for sponsoring these rich and meaningful conversations. Have a good one.